Hey, thank y'all for joining me for a brief Bible study today. I hope everyone's doing well. We miss being with y'all, but I'm glad we'll still be able to study Scripture together a little bit. We'll be reading out of Luke chapter 4 this morning. I know in the Hype class we've been working through the book of Genesis, and I look forward to picking that back up when we meet together again, hopefully very soon. But for now, I thought we could spend a little time in the Gospel of Luke. I figure we could all use a little Jesus right now. I know I could. And I really love the Gospel of Luke. It's definitely in my top 5 favorite Gospels. I think it's a great one. But if you remember in the Gospel of Luke, the first 2 chapters are about the events leading up to Jesus' birth, and then the Christmas story, and Jesus and his parents visiting Jerusalem. Remember where Jesus' parents leave him behind and they find him in the temple. And then in chapter 3 of Luke, we have the story of John the Baptist, who is announcing Jesus' coming and who baptizes Jesus. And that leads us into the start of Luke chapter 4, where Jesus goes out into the wilderness for 40 days of prayer and fasting. And there he's tempted by the devil, but Jesus overcomes all the temptations, and he returns from the wilderness filled with the Spirit of God, ready to finally start his ministry. So that's where we will pick up. We'll be reading out of Luke chapter 4, starting in verse 14. Feel free to press pause on the video and go and grab a Bible if you need to, but the words will also be here up on the screen for you to read if that's helpful. Luke 4, starting in verse 14. Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and news about him spread through the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues that everyone praised him. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. "Isn't this Joseph's son?" they asked. Okay, let's stop here for a minute. We'll pick back up reading in a little bit, but I want to talk first about a couple of things. First, I think we should notice in verses 14 and 15, which tell us that Jesus has been traveling all around the countryside in Galilee, teaching and preaching. And I think that's important because it presents us with this question: why did Luke decide to tell us about this particular sermon that Jesus gives? Why didn't he tell us about Jesus' sermon in Sepphoris or in Tiberias, one of the other cities in the region? Why did Luke think this sermon was so important? Well, there's a couple reasons, and we'll come back to that in a little bit, but I want you to just be thinking about this question. Why does Luke tell us this story? And second, did you notice what Jesus did when he read? He stood up to read. And that was the common custom in Jesus' day. You would stand up to read from Scripture and then sit down to teach. Why stand up to read? It's because everyone wanted to be very clear about where the real authority was. The real authority didn't come from the teacher. It came from the words of Scripture which the teacher read. So he would stand up to read as if to say, "This is what really matters." And then he'd sit down to teach because the teaching itself was less important. I hope you'll always remember that sometimes us teachers make mistakes, mess up. Sometimes we don't always teach things the way that we should, but the words of Scripture will never fail to do what God created them to do. And that's great news for us because we might not always have access to a teacher or somebody to listen to explain things to us, but we always have access to Scripture. That's why Jesus stands to read Scripture, because even he, the Son of God, reminds us that the words in the Bible have true, real authority, and we should listen to them. Okay, I'm going to pick back up reading in Luke 4, reading again, starting in verse 23. Jesus said to them, "Surely you will quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself.' And you will tell me, 'Do here in your hometown what we've heard that you did in Capernaum.' Truly I tell you," he continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time when the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. And there were many in Israel with leprosy at the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian." All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of the town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built, in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Well, that story took a bit of a left turn, didn't it? One minute, Jesus is reading from Scripture and teaching, and everybody is amazed at the words that he's saying. And the next minute, everyone's trying to throw him off of a cliff. What happened? Jesus says it really simply. He says, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. He means that sometimes the people who know us the best or who have known us the longest have the hardest time listening to our wisdom, listening to what we have to say, because sometimes they put us into a box of how they've known us in the past. In high school, I was always the funny guy in school. I know y'all might say, the funny guy? You've never said anything funny in your life. And you're right, I wasn't actually funny, but I always tried to be funny. I tried to make jokes, tried to make people laugh. I was a bit of a class clown, even though nobody actually thought I was that funny. That's how people knew me. But after a while, I sort of got tired of just being the funny guy, and I wanted people to take me a little bit more seriously. But everybody just knew me as the jokester, and they couldn't see me as anything else. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where you can't seem to break out of some stereotype that used to fit you, but doesn't anymore. Maybe you used to be into some certain movie or TV show, but you're not anymore. Or you used to be all about playing softball, or all about some video game, or you used to make certain decisions that you don't make anymore. And you really want people to know that you've changed, but they keep putting you into a box of who you used to be. I don't know if you've ever had somebody, maybe a family member or a relative or someone who's just known you for a long time, say, I remember when you were younger and you used to do blank, something, whatever, fill in the blank there with whatever you used to do. They say, I remember when you were younger, you used to always do this. And it was kind of annoying because you're like, I've grown up, I've changed, I don't do that anymore. And I wish that people could see me for who I am now, the person that I've become, not the person I used to be. And that's what Jesus is dealing with here. Everyone in Nazareth, his hometown, knows him really well. They know him as Joseph's son. That's why they say, isn't this Joseph's son, the carpenter's son? Mary and Joseph's little boy? These people probably babysat him and changed his diaper and taught him how to ride a bicycle. But now he's coming back and he's claiming to be some big prophet, the Messiah, the Son of God. But they just know him as Jesus from Nazareth, Mary and Joseph's little boy. And they have a hard time taking him seriously. That's why Jesus tells this story about when the prophets Elijah and Elisha had to leave the land of Israel or seek somebody who wasn't from Israel to do their ministry. They couldn't minister to the people in Israel because the people in that land, the land where they had grown up, weren't taking them seriously. The people get upset with Jesus for saying this. They say, we know you. They think he's disrespecting them. And they think he's disrespecting God. And they're ready to throw him off a cliff. So what does Jesus do here to get people to take him seriously? He doesn't throw a tantrum and start yelling at them. He doesn't say, "You don't even know me." He doesn't make some big argument trying to convince them that he's changed. What he does is he walks away. The text tells us he goes on his way. And the phrase, "the way," is one that comes up a lot in the Gospel of Luke. The way is the path. In the book of Acts, the continuation of the book of Luke, Christians are called people of the way. The way is Jesus' mission. The way is Jesus' purpose. The way Jesus convinces people to take him seriously is by getting on with what he's there to do. He doesn't tell them, he shows them. Through his words and through his actions, and eventually through his sacrifice on the cross, Jesus shows the world that he should be taken seriously. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't even happen in a year. It took several years of Jesus' ministry for him to prove to people that he is who he says he is. But he never got into an argument about who he was. When he was on trial and the high priests and the Roman government is asking him, "Are you the king? Are you the person they all say you are?" Jesus says, "If you say I am, then I guess I am." He doesn't fight back. He doesn't argue. He's not trying to prove through his words that he is who he claims to be. He proves through his actions that he is who he claims to be. When I had spent my whole life making jokes about everything, people weren't going to just take me seriously overnight. And they weren't just going to take me seriously because one day I said, "Okay, I'm done with the jokes. I'm done being the funny guy. Now you take me seriously." I had to prove to them over time that I wasn't just the class clown. If we want people to believe that we've changed, that we've grown up, that we're not defined by our past or what we used to be, we have to show them like Jesus did. And sometimes that takes time. And sometimes we have to say to those people, "Hey, haven't I shown you, haven't I proven to you that I've grown out of that thing that you keep bringing up?" And they might say, "You know what, you're right. I hadn't noticed that." But they're not going to believe us if our actions don't line up with our words. Sometimes the people who know us the best have the hardest time listening to us. But the way we convince them to take us seriously is through our actions. It's through what we do, how we serve, how we love, just like Jesus did. Okay, the last thing I want to bring up from this text is the verse that Jesus reads from. In verses 18 and 19 of our text, Jesus is reading from Isaiah chapter 61. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." This little passage that we just read brings me back to my question from earlier about why would Luke include this particular lesson that Jesus taught, but not every single lesson that he taught. Obviously, Luke couldn't include every lesson, so he chose to include this sermon. Why this one and not another one? I think it's because this verse, this passage from Isaiah 61, is a passage that Jesus uses to define his entire ministry. Jesus will quote this passage several times in the Gospel of Luke. This is his favorite memory verse. It's the verse that has shaped his identity, shaped who he is, and how he approaches the world. And over the next few weeks, I'll share a little bit more about how this passage from Isaiah 61 has shaped Jesus' ministry. But for now, I'll just say that everything that Jesus does or says fits into this verse. He proclaims good news. He sets captives free. He gives sight to the blind, both the literally blind and the spiritually blind. He frees the oppressed. Everything Jesus does is grounded in this scripture. So my question for you is, what verse or passage is your life grounded in? Is there some Bible verse that has meant a lot to you? Maybe helping you through a hard time or giving you a sense of purpose in life? For me, Exodus chapter 4 has been a really defining passage. In Exodus 4, we have the story of the burning bush where God calls Moses to be a leader, even though Moses doesn't think he can do it. And that passage has been a source of comfort for me when I feel that God has called me to do things that I wasn't prepared for. I know, because of Exodus 4, that I can trust that God is in control, even when I fail. I've asked Emily if she would be willing to come share a verse or a passage with us that's been influential for her life as well. So Emily, if you want to come over.
Hey guys. Yeah, so one of my favorite Bible passages is found in Psalm 91. This is a chapter that my family used to recite together every night when we were little. I remember it had a lot of really big words in the middle. Some of the words are pestilence and pinions that I didn't fully understand, and I still had to go Google what they meant today. But saying it together with my family always brought a lot of comfort. This passage talks a lot about trusting God no matter the circumstance. He always provides for us and will always protect us. One of my favorite parts is where it seems like God is speaking to us in verses 14 through 16. Here are those words. Because he holds fast to me in love, I will deliver him. I will protect him because he knows my name. When he calls to me, I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will rescue and honor him. With long life, I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. I find it really encouraging to know that God is listening to me and to us when we call to him, and that he will be with us even in the hard times. This passage has meant a lot to me ever since I was a kid, and it still does today.
That's great. Thank you. So what do pestilence and pinions mean? You still don't remember?
Pinions means feathers.
Okay.
Pestilence is like a bad thing.
Okay. You knew that one, though.
Yeah, I knew that one. The
Okay.
pinions was
Pinions
the one.
was the one. I didn't know it either. I didn't know what a pinion was. So those are just some verses, some passages that have been meaningful to us. But what about you? Is there a verse or a passage that means a lot to you? Something that has been with you through hard times or through good times? My challenge for you this week is to think about that question. And maybe even more importantly, to ask the people that you're around if they have verses that have defined their lives. Ask your parents. Maybe ask your grandparents. If you're not around them this week, call them up. They could probably use a conversation right now. And ask them about the Bible passages that have shaped their lives. It's important that we study the whole Bible, but I also think it's really helpful for us to find certain verses or places in Scripture that we can go back to when times are hard or when we lose our way. That's the solid ground that we build our lives on, the foundation that everything else grows out of. That's how we grow in faith and in service to God. So thank you all for watching. I hope you're having a good week. You're staying safe and healthy. Please stay in touch with us. We love you guys a lot. Thank you. Bye-bye.